I think I have an excellent elections bill, and I've had bipartisan support on it, and yet we can't get a hearing, which is kind of normal under the realm here. Nobody wants to change elections, and that's tragic, and it has to do with really the Coleman-Franken race, and it's not because I want to pick winners and losers. Those people that know me know if you win an election, I don't care if you're Democrat, I don't care if you're Republican, you did it right, you won. We have these troubling times, though, where the Coleman-Franken deal, it's outside of the purview of voters, and I think that's wrong. When you get to the end of a race and he who has the best lawyer wins, that's wrong under any circumstance because that does disenfranchise the voters. The attorneys get to pick and choose whose votes count and whose votes don't, and I think the Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore was very clear that if you recount anything, you need to be the same all across the state. That's not happening in the Coleman-Franken thing. So my bill says under a recount, what you do is, number one, you recount it with the same method you actually used to count them the night of the election. And you only recount the ballots you count on the night of the election. Because that is a recount. Everything that was counted election night is what stays in the bin. And people can say, well, yeah, but optical scanners aren't as good as humans and stuff. No, that's wrong. Optical scanners are tens of thousands of times more accurate than human beings. When you make a mistake on your ballot, it gets rejected at the poll, and those hard-trained polling workers, they tell you that your ballot got rejected and give you an opportunity to re-vote. If you don't want to re-vote, then maybe you were trying to make a statement that way, and that should be the end of the story. We shouldn't go back and then try to include those rejected ballots later saying, oh, they didn't get a chance to vote. No, that's just not accurate. It's not right. It's not truthful. People get a chance to correct that ballot right away, and if they don't want to, that typically means they were trying to make a statement with that ballot by voting for a couple people. And there's a lot of people that try to make a statement with the ballot. So my bill says you recount them the same method, and what most people don't understand, even on election night, the reason the polls don't, all that polling data doesn't come back right away is it's just like closing out your bank drawer. You recount the ballots till it counts the same number every time. So if you run them through a machine, you're going to run them through a machine again until that number comes out the same twice or more. So you can even argue that on election night, whatever the results were, that person won at least twice on election night because you took the first number and then you reran them, and if the number came out the same, that's the number. Then moving on from there, when it does come into that constitutional challenge question where they should be recounted, what my bill does is says if the canvassing board overturns it and say it's still within, we'll use a round number, 200. So we'll even use the Coleman-Franken thing. Coleman wins by 200, election night, the canvassing board's appointed, Franken now wins by 200. But let me be clear, what Franken won by is not by the same ballots that were cast election night. There was new ballots brought in, and they were brought in under different ways. So even if he wins, and as long as those ballots statewide are brought in the same way, I have no problem with that. But my bill says you bring them all, you recount them all the same way from every county, from every city. You don't pick and choose which ballots get to be recounted. So if it gets back to now Franken wins by 200, and again, using this only as an example because it's here and people get it, then what happens is because both parties won, we go back to a runoff election. And I want to be very careful not to do what Georgia does. Georgia says you can only vote in that runoff election if you voted election night. Well, I think that's wrong. Because sometimes we make a statement by staying home on election night saying, you know what, I don't like either of the candidates, I'm not voting. I don't want that to happen. But I think we should have a runoff election. And then others will say, well, it's expensive to run an election. Guess what? It's way cheaper than running and back to court. Way cheaper for the Minnesota people. And then we need, as voters, to get out there and say, you know what, it was close. We all need to get out and vote. We need to encourage our friends, but that is the only way all voters get a chance to be sure their vote is counted and be sure that vote count is not perverted by attorneys. So that's really what my election bill does.